Billionaire Agnello Vivarini never imagined that his empire of silence and solitude would begin to crumble because of a dirty little girl sleeping in his doghouse. Avani, rejected by everyone, became impossible to ignore, especially when the name of her mother, Mirella, rekindled ghosts that he believed had been buried for decades. When investigating the past, Agnello discovers that the child could be his granddaughter, the fruit of a story of love and abandonment that he tried to erase. But before I tell you this story, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this continuing. The security footage flickered across Marcus Johnston's tablet screen as he made his morning rounds of the sprawling Westbrook estate. 20 years as head groundskeeper had taught him every inch of the property, from the meticulously manicured rose gardens to the towering iron gates that kept the world at bay. But nothing in those years had prepared him for what he saw that grey November morning. There, curled up inside Thor's doghouse, was a child. Marcus zoomed in on the feed, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the view. The massive German Shepherd, normally territorial and aloof with strangers, lay curled protectively around a tiny figure. The child couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, wearing clothes that hung in tatters from her thin frame. Her dark hair was matted, her skin smudged with dirt. But what struck Marcus most was how still she lay, as if trying to make herself invisible to the world. He immediately called the main house security office. "Get me Mr. Kingston now." "Sir, you know Mr. Kingston doesn't take calls before." "Just do it," Marcus cut in, his voice sharp with urgency. "We have a situation." Several tense minutes passed before Gerald Kingston's clipped tones came through the speaker. As head of security for Arnold Blackwood, one of America's most reclusive billionaires, Kingston was the gatekeeper between the outside world and his employer's carefully ordered existence. "This had better be important, Johnston." Marcus described what he was seeing, watching as the child stirred slightly in her sleep, pressing closer to Thor's warm fur. The dog, usually quick to alert security to any intrusion, simply laid his head over her protectively. "I'm calling the police," Kingston declared. "Wait," Marcus said quickly. "Look at her. She's just a kid, and she's clearly been out here for a while. Thor's never acted like this with anyone before. Maybe we should... Our job is to protect Mr. Blackwood's privacy and property, not run a homeless shelter. I'm making the call." But before Kingston could reach for his phone, another voice cut through the line, deeper, commanding, edged with the authority that came from decades of building a real estate empire. "Do nothing of the sort, Kingston." Arnold Blackwood himself had been listening in. The billions he'd amassed through his property developments had bought him the luxury of total seclusion in his sprawling mansion, and he guarded that privacy zealously. He hadn't left the estate grounds in nearly 5 years, managing his empire through video calls and an army of representatives. "Sir," Kingston stammered, "protocol dictates..." "I'm well aware of the protocols, Kingston. I wrote them." There was a long pause, filled only with the soft static of the connection. "Johnston, you say Thor hasn't harmed her?" "No, sir. If anything, he seems to be protecting her. I've never seen him behave this way with a stranger before." Another pause, longer this time. When Blackwood spoke again, there was something different in his voice, something that made Marcus think of cracks appearing in a wall that had stood unmoved for years. "Bring her inside carefully. Have Mrs. Chen prepare a room in the east wing far from my quarters. And Kingston?" "Yes, sir?" "This doesn't leave the property. Not a word to anyone. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, Mr. Blackwood." Marcus made his way across the frost-covered lawn toward Thor's doghouse, his mind racing. In 2 decades, he'd never known Arnold Blackwood to show interest in anything beyond his business dealings and his solitude. Something about this child had caught his attention, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this grey November morning marked the beginning of something none of them could predict. As he approached, Thor raised his head, eyes alert but calm. The child stirred, and for a moment her eyes opened, deep brown, filled with a wariness that no child should know. She didn't speak, didn't cry out, or try to run. She simply watched. As Marcus knelt beside the doghouse, her small body tensed like a wild animal preparing to flee. "It's all right," Marcus said softly, extending his hand palm up, the way he'd first approached Thor years ago. "You're safe now." We're going to get you warm and fed. Would you like that?" She didn't respond, but her eyes flickered to his hand, then to Thor, who had risen and was gently nudging her with his nose. The trust she showed in the dog, even as she shrank from human contact, made Marcus's heart ache. As he helped her stand on legs stiff from cold, he noticed something clutched in her small fist, a crumpled piece of paper with a drawing he couldn't quite make out. She held onto it like it was her only possession in the world. Perhaps it was. What no one knew then, as they led the silent child toward the warmth of the mansion, was that her appearance would crack open decades of buried secrets. The drawing in her hand would prove to be the first piece of a puzzle that would force Arnold Blackwood to confront the past he'd spent a fortune trying to forget. And Thor, the loyal guardian who had recognized something in this lost child that the humans around her had missed, would play a role in a story that would change all their lives forever. But for now, she was just a hungry, cold child being led into a house that had forgotten how to be a home. And somewhere in his sealed-off wing of the mansion, Arnold Blackwood stood at a window watching, his hands clasped behind his back as the first disruption to his carefully ordered world in 20 years crossed his threshold. Mrs. Chen had been managing Arnold Blackwood's household for 15 years, maintaining the precise routine that her employer demanded with unwavering efficiency. But as she stood in the doorway of the hastily prepared guest room, watching the silent child huddled in the center of the massive bed, she felt completely out of her depth. The girl hadn't spoken a word since being brought inside. She'd allowed Mrs. Chen to help her bathe and had mechanically eaten a few spoonfuls of soup, but her eyes remained distant, focused on something none of them could see. The only time any emotion crossed her face was when they tried to take the crumpled paper from her hand. Then she'd clutched it tighter and pulled away with such terror that they'd quickly relented. "Has she said anything?" Kingston's voice made Mrs. Chen jump. He stood behind her, his usual commanding presence somehow diminished by the strange atmosphere that had settled over the house. "Nothing. She won't even tell us her name." Mrs. Chen's voice dropped to a whisper. "Gerald, I've seen homeless children before, but this is different. The way she acts, it's like she's never known anything but being alone." Kingston shifted uncomfortably. "The police should be handling this. We're not equipped." "Mr. Blackwood was very clear about no police involvement," Mrs. Chen cut in, sharply. Then more gently, "Have you heard anything from him? He's requested all security footage from the past week. He wants to know how long she's been coming to the property." Kingston ran a hand through his graying hair. "In 5 years, I've never known him to take such an interest in anything outside his immediate concerns." Inside the room, the child had begun to draw on a notepad Mrs. Chen had provided. Her movements were precise, focused, as if the act of creating these images was as essential as breathing. Every few minutes, she would glance at the crumpled paper she refused to surrender, then continue her new drawing with renewed intensity. "Mr. Johnston says Thor's still agitated," Kingston continued. "He won't leave the area under her window. Keeps pacing, whining. In all my years here, I've never seen him act this way." Before Mrs. Chen could respond, a maid rushed up to them, her face pale. "Mr. Blackwood wants to see the child's drawings. All of them. Right now." Mrs. Chen and Kingston exchanged glances. In 15 years, Arnold Blackwood had never requested to see anything that wasn't directly related to his business dealings. He conducted all meetings via video conference, took his meals alone, and had transformed his wing of the mansion into a self-contained world that no one, not even Mrs. Chen, was permitted to enter. "Sarah," the child suddenly spoke, her voice so soft they almost missed it. It was the first word she'd uttered since arriving. They all turned to look at her, but she didn't meet their eyes. She just continued drawing, her small hand moving across the paper with unwavering focus. "Is that your name?" Mrs. Chen asked, gently. "Sarah?" The child didn't respond. Instead, she held up her drawing, a simple but haunting sketch of a woman's face. The eyes were kind, but filled with a profound sadness that seemed to reach out from the paper and grab at their hearts. "Sarah," the girl repeated, touching the woman's face in the drawing. Kingston took the drawing, his hands trembling slightly. "I'll take this to Mr. Blackwood immediately." But as he turned to leave, a sound echoed through the mansion's corridors, the heavy thud of a door opening, followed by footsteps. Footsteps coming from the direction of Arnold Blackwood's private wing. Mrs. Chen's hand flew to her mouth. "So he's coming himself." The footsteps grew closer, measured and deliberate. The household staff froze, unsure how to react to this unprecedented event. In the room, the child continued drawing, seeming oblivious to the mounting tension around. Then Arnold Blackwood appeared in the doorway, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the plush carpet. His face, usually seen only through video screens, looked older in person, lined with years of isolation and buried regrets. His eyes, sharp despite his age, fixed immediately on the child. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft scratching of the child's pencil against paper. Then Blackwood did something that shocked his staff even more than his appearance. He stepped into the room and slowly, carefully, lowered himself to sit on the floor near the bed where the child was drawing. Not too close, but close enough to see her face. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Was that your mother's name?" The child's hand stilled. Slowly, she raised her eyes to meet his. And in that moment, as their gazes locked, Mrs. Chen saw something she would never forget, recognition. Not of a face, perhaps, but of something deeper, something that spoke of shared loss, of secrets too heavy to carry alone. The crumpled paper fell from the child's hand, landing face up on the bed. Arnold Blackwood reached for it with fingers that shook visibly, smoothing it out with a gentleness none of them had ever seen him display. His sharp intake of breath echoed in the silent room. The drawing showed a young woman rendered with the imperfect skill of a child's hand, but unmistakably the same face as in the new sketch. And in the corner, written in faded ink, was a date and a name that made Arnold Blackwood's face go white as paper. Jessica Blackwood. The name of his daughter, who had disappeared 25 years ago, leaving behind nothing but questions and regret. And now sitting before him was a child who drew her face with the familiarity of memory. The next 24 hours in the Blackwood mansion unfolded like a dream that no one dared interrupt. Arnold Blackwood, the man who had spent years sealing himself away from the world, hadn't returned to his private wing. Instead, he remained near the child, watching her draw with an intensity that bordered on desperation. The girl, who they now knew was named Emily, still barely spoke. But her drawings told stories that words couldn't capture, scenes from a life lived in shadows, on the margins of the world that had failed to notice her. And through it all, the face of Sarah, Jessica Blackwood, appeared again and again, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying, but always with those same sad eyes that seemed to hold secrets. Mrs. Chen had never seen her employer so undone. The careful walls he'd built around himself were crumbling, and beneath them was a man she barely recognized. He made phone calls in hushed, urgent tones, pulling strings that hadn't been touched in decades. Hospital records were searched, old addresses investigated, and gradually a story began to emerge, one that made Mrs. Chen's heart ache with its cruelty. Jessica Blackwood had indeed given birth to a daughter 6 years ago. She'd named her Emily after her grandmother, but Jessica had been sick, fighting a losing battle with cancer that had drained what little resources she had. She'd tried to reach out to her father multiple times during her illness, but her letters had been intercepted by Kingston's predecessor, who had been under strict orders to shield Mr. Blackwood from any attempts at contact from his estranged daughter. The truth of what happened next came in pieces, delivered by private investigators working through the night. Jessica had died 3 months ago in a small hospital on the outskirts of the city. Emily had been placed in temporary foster care, but she'd run away repeatedly, always trying to find her way back to the last address she knew, her mother's childhood home, now the Blackwood estate. "She was looking for me," Arnold whispered, his voice breaking as he watched Emily sleep, finally exhausted from hours of drawing. "She was right here, sleeping in a doghouse, while I sat in my office counting money and hiding from the world. Mrs. Chen wanted to offer comfort, but what could she say? The truth was too raw, too painful. They had all been complicit in maintaining the barriers that had kept this child from her only remaining family. But Emily's ordeal was far from over. That evening she developed a fever that sent her small body into violent shivers. The doctor, hastily summoned and sworn to secrecy, diagnosed severe pneumonia, the result of weeks spent sleeping outdoors in the advancing winter cold. She needs to be hospitalized, the doctor insisted, but Arnold Blackwood wouldn't hear of it. Transform the East Wing into a hospital room if you have to, he ordered, but she's not leaving this house. I'm not losing her again. Through the night, as Emily's fever raged, Arnold Blackwood sat by her bed, his usual impeccable appearance forgotten. His tie was loose, his silver hair disheveled, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He held her small hand and, for the first time in decades, he prayed. Mrs. Chen, watching from the doorway, saw him take out an old photograph from his pocket. A picture of Jessica as a child, standing in front of this very house. The resemblance between mother and daughter was striking, made more poignant by the knowledge of all that had been lost. "I did this," he murmured, though whether to himself or to the unconscious child, Mrs. Chen couldn't tell. "I was so angry when Jessica refused to join the family business, when she chose to become an artist instead. I cut her off, told her she was no longer my daughter. I was teaching her a lesson, I told myself. I never imagined," his voice broke, "I never imagined I would never see her again." Emily stirred in her fever-induced sleep, mumbling words they couldn't understand. Thor, who had been allowed inside, against all usual protocols, lay beside her bed, his eyes never leaving her face. The dog's devotion seemed to mirror something awakening in Arnold Blackwood, a protective instinct long dormant, now surging back to life with overwhelming force. Kingston appeared in the doorway, his face grave. "Sir, the press is starting to ask questions. Someone at the hospital where Jessica died recognized her name. They're connecting her to you." For a moment, the old Arnold Blackwood surfaced, the man who guarded his privacy with ruthless efficiency. But then Emily whimpered in her sleep, and that man disappeared again, replaced by someone who suddenly understood that there were things more important than privacy and control. "Let them ask," he said quietly, surprising them all. "I'm done hiding. I'm done pretending the past doesn't exist. My daughter died thinking I hated her. I won't let her child grow up believing the same thing." The night stretched on endlessly as Emily's fever continued to climb. Specialists were called in, medical equipment was rushed to the mansion, and still Arnold Blackwood didn't move from her side. He spoke to her softly, telling her stories about her mother as a child, about the grandmother she was named after, about all the family she should have known. Mrs. Chen organized the household staff in shifts, ensuring that fresh, cool cloths were always available, that the medical team had everything they needed, that Thor was fed and cared for without having to leave his post. Through it all, she watched her employer transform from a distant figure of authority into something else entirely, a grandfather desperately trying to make up for lost time. As dawn approached, Emily's fever finally broke. The medical team sighed in relief, but warned that she wasn't out of danger yet. Her small body had been through too much, been strong for too long. The road to recovery would be long and uncertain. Arnold Blackwood nodded at their words, but Mrs. Chen could see in his eyes that he had already made up his mind about something. When the doctors left, he called her and Kingston into the room. "I want all the paperwork prepared," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "Whatever it takes to establish legal guardianship. Emily is my granddaughter, and this is her home now." He looked down at the child, his expression softening. "It always should have been." The next few weeks brought changes to the Blackwood mansion that no one could have predicted. The East Wing, once a series of unused guest rooms, was transformed into a space for Emily's recovery. The walls, previously stark and formal, were now adorned with her drawings, each one carefully preserved and framed at Arnold's insistence. But the physical changes to the house were nothing compared to the transformation in its owner. Arnold Blackwood, who had once conducted all business from behind closed doors, now spent hours sitting with Emily as she slowly regained her strength. He learned to understand her silences, to read the stories in her drawings, to be patient when the trauma of her past overwhelmed her. The breakthrough came on a quiet afternoon in December, as snow fell softly outside the windows. Emily had been drawing as usual, when she suddenly spoke more than 2 words together for the first time since her arrival. "Mommy said you lived in a castle," she whispered, not looking up from her paper. "She used to drive me past here sometimes. She said my grandfather was a king who lost his way." Arnold's hands trembled as he reached for the drawing she was working on. It showed the Blackwood mansion, but not as it was now, as it had been 25 years ago, when the gardens were full of roses and the fountains played day and night. Jessica must have described it to her daughter in detail. "I wasn't a king," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I was a fool who thought money could replace love. Your mother was wiser than I ever was." Emily looked up at him then, her dark eyes serious. "She wasn't angry at you. She was sad. She said everyone gets lost sometimes, even kings." The word struck Arnold like a physical blow. He had spent years building walls around his heart, convincing himself that Jessica's rejection of the family business was a betrayal. He had never considered that she might have understood him better than he understood himself. But Emily's recovery wasn't linear. There were setbacks, nights when she woke screaming from nightmares, days when she retreated into silence, moments when the weight of all she had lost seemed too heavy for her small shoulders to bear. The household staff watched helplessly as she struggled, their hearts breaking for this child who had endured so much. Mrs. Chen found herself becoming increasingly protective of Emily, teaching her to make simple origami animals, reading her stories, trying to create moments of normalcy in a life that had known too little of it. She noticed that the girl seemed most at peace when Thor was nearby, as if the dog's steady presence anchored her to the present when memories threatened to pull her under. Kingston, too, had changed. The man who had once been ready to call the police now kept a watchful eye on Emily's window, personally vetting every medical professional and tutor who entered the house. His guilt over his role in keeping Jessica's letters from reaching her father ate at him, driving him to excessive caution in protecting her daughter. But it was Arnold who underwent the most profound transformation. The man who had once measured everything in terms of profit and loss now spent hours learning about childhood trauma, consulting with therapists, trying to understand how to help his granddaughter heal. His business associates were shocked to find their calls redirected, their meetings rescheduled around Emily's needs. One morning, as Mrs. Chen passed Emily's room, she overheard something that brought tears to her eyes. Arnold was sitting with Emily, looking through an old photo album, when the girl suddenly pointed to a picture of Jessica as a teenager. "That's when Mommy started painting," Emily said softly. "She told me she used to paint in the garden here. She said it made her feel free." Arnold was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Would you like to see where she used to paint?" Emily nodded, and Mrs. Chen watched as Arnold carefully helped her stand. She was still weak from her illness, requiring support to walk more than short distances. Together, grandfather and granddaughter made their way slowly toward the garden door, Thor padding faithfully beside them. But at the threshold, Emily stopped, her small body tensing. "I'm scared," she whispered. Arnold knelt beside her, despite his aging knees protesting the movement. "Of what, sweetheart?" "That if I go outside, this will all disappear, like in my dreams." The raw honesty in her voice made Mrs. Chen's heart clench. How many times had this child woken up alone, believing that any moment of happiness was just another dream to be snatched away? Arnold's response surprised them all. Instead of offering reassurances or trying to reason with her fears, he simply sat down on the floor beside her, still holding her hand. "Then we'll wait," he said gently. "We'll wait as long as you need. I'm not going anywhere, Emily, not ever again." As winter deepened its hold on the city, Arnold Blackwood found himself facing challenges that no amount of business acumen could solve. The legal process of establishing guardianship over Emily had unleashed a storm of media attention, that threatened to overwhelm them all. Reporters camped outside the gates, their cameras trained on the mansion day and night, hoping to catch a glimpse of the reclusive billionaire and the granddaughter no one knew existed. The publicity was exactly what Arnold had spent decades avoiding, but now he faced it with a new purpose. Each morning he would sit in Emily's room holding her hand as she struggled with the simple act of eating breakfast and remind himself that some things were worth more than privacy. "Mr. Blackwood," Mrs. Chen said one morning, her face tight with concern. "The social workers will be here today for their evaluation." Arnold nodded, his eyes never leaving Emily, who was attempting to draw with hands that still shook from weakness. The pneumonia had left her body fragile, and the emotional toll of her past continued to manifest in ways that broke their hearts. "They'll want to interview her alone," Mrs. Chen continued softly, "to ensure she feels safe here." For a moment, fear flickered across Arnold's face, fear that Emily might retreat into silence again, that the authorities might decide he wasn't fit to care for her, that he might lose her just as he was beginning to understand what it meant to be a grandfather. Emily looked up from her drawing, her dark eyes understanding more than a child her age should. "Are they going to take me away?" she whispered. Before Arnold could respond, Thor, who had become her constant shadow, pressed closer to her side, as if declaring his own opposition to any such possibility. The dog's protective instinct had only grown stronger as Emily recovered, to the point where the household staff had learned to announce themselves before entering her room to avoid triggering his guardianship. "No, sweetheart," Arnold said, firmly, though Mrs. Chen could hear the tremor of uncertainty in his voice. "This is your home now, I promise." But promises, they all knew, sometimes weren't enough. The social workers arrived precisely at 10, their professional demeanor masking the curiosity that brought an extra gleam to their eyes. It wasn't every day they evaluated a case involving one of America's wealthiest men. The interviews stretched through the morning. Emily, showing a strength that amazed them all, answered the social workers' questions in her quiet way, her hands constantly moving across paper, drawing scenes from her life before the mansion, the small apartment where she'd lived with her mother, the hospital rooms that had become too familiar, the long nights of wandering after Jessica's death. Kingston, watching from his security monitors, saw something in those drawings that made him pause the feed. "Mrs. Chen," he called urgently, "look at this." The drawings showed a pattern they hadn't noticed before. In each scene of Emily's past life, there was a shadow of the Blackwood mansion in the background. Sometimes it was just a suggestion of towers in the distance, sometimes a more detailed sketch, but it was always there, like a beacon she had been trying to reach. "She was searching for this place all along," Mrs. Chen whispered, her throat tight. "Even before Jessica died, she was drawing it." The social workers' questions became more pointed as the day progressed. They asked about Arnold's long isolation, about his ability to connect with a traumatized child, about the dramatic change in his lifestyle. But it was their questions about Jessica that proved most difficult. "Mr. Blackwood," one of them said, her voice carefully neutral, "can you explain why you had no contact with your daughter in the years before her death? Why you were unaware of your granddaughter's existence?" Arnold sat in his study, the room he had once considered his sanctuary now feeling more like a confession booth. He could have deflected, could have had his lawyers handle the question, but he thought of Emily's courage in sharing her story and knew he owed her the same honesty. "I was wrong," he said simply, the words falling like stones in the quiet room. "I was a proud, foolish man who thought I knew what was best for everyone. I tried to control my daughter's life, and when she chose her own path, I let my anger blind me. I didn't just lose her, I threw her away. And now..." His voice broke. "Now all I can do is try to be the grandfather Emily needs, even though I don't deserve the chance." The social workers exchanged glances, making notes in their files. But it was what happened next that would prove decisive in their evaluation. A sound from the hallway interrupted the interview. Emily's voice raised in distress. Arnold was on his feet instantly, all thoughts of maintaining professional composure forgotten. They found her in the middle of a panic attack, triggered by a well-meaning staff member who had moved her art supplies while cleaning. What the social workers witnessed then was not the calculated actions of a man trying to prove his fitness as a guardian, but the raw, instinctive response of a grandfather to his granddaughter's pain. Arnold sat on the floor beside Emily, speaking, softly, not trying to touch her or force her to calm down, just being present until the storm passed. "It's all right," he murmured, as Thor pressed against Emily's other side. "Everything's going to stay right where you put it. This is your home, remember? You make the rules about your things." Slowly, Emily's breathing steadied. She reached for Arnold's hand and then did something she had never done before. She crawled into his lap, burying her face in his shoulder. The social worker's report arrived a week later, recommending that Emily remain in Arnold Blackwood's custody, but it came with conditions that would reshape life at the mansion entirely. Regular therapy sessions, educational assessments, continued medical monitoring, a whole network of support that Arnold threw himself into arranging with the same intensity he had once devoted to business deals. But it was the unexpected discovery in Jessica's old room that truly marked the beginning of healing for both grandfather and granddaughter. Mrs. Chen had been supervising the renovation of the space into a proper bedroom for Emily when they found the box. It had been hidden in a false bottom of the window seat, a time capsule of sorts, filled with Jessica's teenage journals, sketches, and photographs. Among them was a letter dated just weeks before she left home for the last time, never delivered, but carefully preserved. Arnold's hands shook as he read it that evening, with Emily asleep in the next room. "Dear Dad, I know you think I'm betraying our family's legacy by choosing art over business. But the truth is, I learned about legacy from you. You taught me that everything. We build should last, should mean something. When I paint, I'm building too, creating something that might touch people's hearts long after I'm gone. I wish you could understand that this is my way of honoring everything you taught me. I'm not running away from our family's heritage. I'm trying to add to it in my own way. And maybe someday you'll see that there are many ways to leave a mark on the world. I'll always love you, Dad. I hope someday you'll forgive me for needing to find my own path. Love, Jessica." The letter slipped from Arnold's fingers, landing softly on his desk. Outside, snow was falling again, muffling the world in white silence. He thought of all the years wasted, of the granddaughter who painted with her mother's same quiet intensity, of second chances that came disguised as life's hardest moments. Emily's art therapy sessions had begun revealing layers of her story that she couldn't express in words. Her therapist, Dr. Sarah Marshall, pointed out patterns in the child's drawings that spoke of both deep trauma and remarkable resilience. In every scene of hardship, hospital rooms, empty apartments, lonely streets, there was always a window, always a glimpse of sky, always a suggestion of hope. She never gave up looking for connection, Dr. Marshall explained, spreading out Emily's latest drawings. Even in her darkest moments, she was reaching out. That's extraordinary for a child who's experienced so much loss. Arnold found himself spending hours in his study, not working on business deals, but poring over books about child psychology, trauma recovery, and art therapy. His business associates were baffled by his new priorities, but for the first time, in decades, he felt he was investing in something truly worthwhile. The transformation of the mansion continued, guided by Emily's gradually emerging personality. The formal dining room, unused for years, became an art studio flooded with natural light. The austere garden paths were softened with wildflowers, Jessica's favorites Emily had remembered from her mother's stories. Thor's doghouse, where the story had begun, was preserved, but transformed into a cozy reading nook where Emily often sat with her grandfather, sharing books and quiet moments. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Emily still had nights when she would wake screaming, convinced she was back on the streets. She still had days when fear would overwhelm her, when the simple act of walking through a doorway became an insurmountable challenge. The difference now was that she wasn't facing these moments alone. One particularly difficult evening, after Emily had finally fallen asleep following a severe panic attack, Mrs. Chen found Arnold sitting in the darkened hallway outside her room, his head in, his hands. "I don't know if I'm doing enough," he confessed quietly. "Sometimes I look at her and see all the ways I failed Jessica, all the signs I must have missed, all the pain I could have prevented." Mrs. Chen sat beside him, breaking years of careful professional distance. "Mr. Blackwood," she said gently, "you're not the same man you were. Emily knows that. Every time she reaches for your hand, every time she shares one of her drawings with you, she's telling you she knows." As if to emphasize the point, Thor padded out of Emily's room and laid his head on Arnold's knee, his brown eyes full of what seemed like understanding. The dog had become a bridge between past and present, between loss and healing. His unwavering loyalty, a reminder that love could survive the hardest transformations. "Jessica would be proud," Mrs. Chen added softly. "Her, not just of Emily's strength, but of how you've learned to open your heart again." Arnold reached down to scratch Thor's ears, remembering how the dog had recognized something in Emily that all their sophisticated security systems had missed. The simple, profound need for protection and love. "We're learning together," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Emily, Thor, all of us, we're learning what it means to be a family." Spring arrived at the Blackwood mansion, bringing with it both new challenges and unexpected moments of joy. Emily's physical health had improved significantly, but the emotional scars ran deeper than anyone had initially understood. As flowers began to bloom in the garden, the household discovered that each step forward often came with 2 steps back. The first major setback occurred when Emily's therapist suggested it was time to start school. The mere mention of leaving the safety of the mansion sent the child into such a severe panic attack that it took hours for her to calm down. Even Thor's usually soothing presence couldn't fully comfort her. "I can't," she whispered, curled into a tight ball in the corner of her art studio. "The other children will know." "Know what, sweetheart?" Arnold asked, sitting on the floor nearby, careful to give her space while remaining present. "That I'm broken, that I'm not like them." Her voice was barely audible, but the pain in it echoed through the room like a shout. Arnold felt his heart crack a little more. He thought of all the board meetings he'd dominated, all the business rivals he'd outmaneuvered, and how none of that experience helped him now. But then he remembered something from Jessica's newly discovered journals, a passage about feeling different, feeling wrong, until she found her voice through art. "Emily," he said softly, "do you remember the story about the Japanese art of kintsugi?" She shook her head slightly, peeking out from behind her knees. "It's a way of repairing broken pottery with gold. Instead of hiding the cracks, they make them beautiful. The Japanese believe that something that's been broken and repaired can be stronger and more precious than something that was never broken at all." Emily uncurled slightly, her artist's mind clearly caught by the image. "With real gold?" "Yes. And you know what? That's what I see when I look at you. Not someone broken, but someone who's becoming stronger in all the places life tried to break her. Just like your mother. It wasn't an immediate fix, nothing was with trauma this deep, but it became a turning point." Emily began drawing again, but now her pictures included shimmering gold lines running through them, connecting fragments of her memories into new patterns of understanding. Dr. Marshall suggested they start smaller than traditional school. A tutor began coming to the mansion 3 times a week, working with Emily at her own pace. Ms. Rebecca Collins, a gentle woman in her 50s with decades of experience working with traumatized children, proved to be another piece of the puzzle falling into place. "She has an extraordinary mind," Ms. Collins reported after their first week together. "She processes information differently, not just visually, but with a depth of emotional understanding that's rare in children her age." The lessons often took place in the art studio, where Emily felt safest. Ms. Collins incorporated art into every subject, allowing Emily to draw her way through mathematics, to paint her understanding of science, to illustrate the stories they read together. Slowly, learning became associated with safety rather than fear. But it was the discovery of Emily's gift for photography that opened up a new world of possibilities. It started when she found an old camera in one of Jessica's boxes, a professional-grade digital camera that had been her mother's constant companion. Arnold had it carefully restored, and Emily began carrying it everywhere, seeing the world through its lens just as her mother had. Through the camera, Emily found a way to control her environment without being overwhelmed by it. She could capture moments of beauty without having to fully engage with the chaos of the world. It became her shield, her way of stepping gradually back into life. The first time she asked to go into the garden specifically to take pictures, the entire household held its breath. Arnold walked beside her, watching as she photographed dewdrops. On rose petals, Thor's paw prints in the soft earth, shadows cast by the morning sun through leaves. Each click of the shutter seemed to release a little more of the tension she carried. "Mum used to say that cameras are like magic boxes," Emily said suddenly, adjusting the focus on a particularly beautiful bloom. "They catch pieces of time and keep them safe forever." Arnold had to turn away for a moment, overwhelmed by the echo of Jessica in those words. When he looked back, Emily was photographing Thor as he rolled happily in a patch of sunlight, and her smile, small but real, was like watching spring itself slowly return after the longest winter. But even as Emily made progress, new challenges emerged. The media's interest in the Blackwood story hadn't waned, and their attempts to get photos of the mysterious granddaughter became increasingly aggressive. Kingston had to upgrade the entire security system and hire additional staff just to maintain their privacy. The pressure reached a breaking point one afternoon when a particularly determined photographer managed to scale the garden wall. Emily, who had been peacefully taking pictures of butterflies, spotted him first. The sound of her camera hitting the ground as she froze in terror would haunt Arnold for months to come. Thor's reaction was instantaneous. The usually gentle dog launched himself toward the intruder with a ferocity that sent the photographer scrambling back over the wall, leaving his own camera behind. But the damage was done. Emily's hard-won sense of security in the garden had been shattered. For days afterwards, she refused to leave her room. The camera lay untouched on her desk, its lens cap firmly in place. Her drawings took on darker tones again, filled with high walls and shadowy figures lurking just out of sight. It was as if all their progress had been erased in a single moment. Arnold was devastated. He blamed himself for not anticipating the threat, for not doing more to protect her. The weight of failure, both past and present, pressed down on him until he could barely breathe. But it was Mrs. Chen who finally helped him see things differently. "Mr. Blackwood," she said one evening, finding him staring out the window at the now empty garden, "do you remember what you told Emily about Kintsugi? About things being stronger where they've been broken?" He nodded slowly, not sure where she was going with this. "Well, maybe this is another crack that needs gold, not just for Emily, but for all of us." Her words sparked something in Arnold's mind, a memory of Jessica's letter about leaving. Marks on the world. He spent the night in his study making calls and arranging meetings. By morning, he had a plan. It started with the photographer's abandoned camera. Instead of destroying it as Kingston had suggested, Arnold had it cleaned and examined. The memory card contained dozens of photos taken around the estate, invasive images that made his blood boil, but also something unexpected. Beautiful shots of the garden, of the mansion at sunrise, of Thor playing in the morning mist. "Emily," he said softly, sitting beside her bed where she lay curled around one of her mother's old sketchbooks, "I want to show you something." He pulled out his tablet and slowly scrolled through the garden photos. "The man who scared you, he was trying to tell a story about us, but he was telling it wrong. I think maybe we need to tell our own story." Emily peered at the photos, her artist's eye clearly caught by the play of light and shadow. "How?" Arnold took a deep breath. "What if we turned the mansion into something more than just our home? What if we made part of it into an art gallery, a place where your mother's work could be shared with the world, where other artists could find the support she never got from me?" He watched her carefully, ready to back off at the first sign of distress. But Emily was sitting up now, her eyes focused intently on the tablet screen. "And what if," he continued gently, "we had a special section for young artists who need a safe place to create? We could share our garden, our story, but on our own terms. It was a radical proposal, opening up part of the fortress he'd spent years sealing off from the world. But as he explained his vision, he saw something awakening in Emily's eyes. She reached for her own camera, holding it thoughtfully. "Could I help?" she asked, her voice small but steady. "With my pictures?" "Of course, it could be our project together, a way to honor your mother and help other people who are feeling lost just like she did." The transformation began slowly but steadily. The west wing of the mansion was carefully renovated into gallery spaces, with security measures subtly integrated into the design. Jessica's art was brought out of storage, professionally restored, and arranged in a dedicated wing that told the story of her journey as an artist. Emily, gradually emerging from her shell again, began documenting the process through her lens. Her photographs captured moments that would have been lost otherwise: the way sunlight fell across her mother's canvases, the careful hands of the art restorers at work, Thor's watchful presence as workers moved through the house. But it was the discovery in the attic that truly bridged past and present. While clearing space for the gallery, they found a collection of Jessica's unfinished works, canvases she had started but never completed, each one frozen in a moment of possibility. Emily stood before them for a long time, her camera forgotten in her hands. Then she turned to her grandfather with an expression he had never seen before, a mixture of determination and hope that made her look startlingly like her mother. "I know what we need to do," she said softly. "We need to finish them. Not just us, but other artists too. Mum always said art was about connection. Maybe." She hesitated, then continued more firmly. "Maybe these could be like the gold in Kintsugi, connecting pieces of her story with new ones." Arnold felt tears prick at his eyes as he recognized the wisdom in her words. This child who had lost so much was teaching him about healing in ways he never expected. The unfinished paintings could become collaborative works, bringing together established artists and young talents in need of support, creating something entirely new from fragments of the past. The summer brought unexpected visitors to the Blackwood mansion. As word spread about the upcoming gallery opening, artists began arriving with portfolios and proposals. Each one had a story that echoed Jessica's in some way, talented individuals who had faced barriers, who had struggled to find their place in the world of art. Emily, to everyone's surprise, appointed herself as an unofficial curator. She would sit quietly in the corner during presentations, her camera ready, capturing not just the artwork, but the moments between, the nervous adjustments of a collar, the way hands moved while explaining a piece, the shadows of doubt and hope that crossed each face. "She sees them," Dr. Marshall observed during one of their sessions, "really sees them in a way most adults have forgotten how to do." The truth of this became apparent when Emily's photographs were developed. They told stories within stories, revealing the humanity behind each artist's carefully professional facade. Arnold found himself looking at these images for hours, seeing the art world through his granddaughter's eyes, understanding finally what Jessica had tried to tell him about different ways of leaving a mark on the world. But it was the arrival of Claire Martinez that truly tested how far they'd all come. Claire was a young artist from the inner city, brought to their attention by one of Jessica's old art school friends. She arrived on a sweltering July afternoon, carrying a portfolio held together with duct tape and determination. What made Claire different was that she brought her daughter with her, a small, solemn-faced child named Maya, just about Emily's age. There had been no choice. The babysitter had cancelled at the last minute, and Claire couldn't afford to miss this opportunity. The moment Maya entered the mansion, Thor's behavior changed. He moved away from Emily for the first time in months, padding over to the newcomer with the same protective interest he had once shown toward Emily. It was as if he recognized another child carrying wounds too heavy for her years. Emily, who still struggled with meeting new people, watched from behind her camera lens as Maya explored the gallery space with quiet curiosity. Through the viewfinder, she captured the moment Maya discovered Jessica's unfinished paintings, the way her small hand reached out to trace the incomplete lines. "She's like me," Emily whispered to Arnold later that evening, showing him the photographs. "She needs a safe place too." The images told a story that Claire's polished portfolio couldn't, of a talented mother struggling to pursue her art while protecting her child, of a little girl growing up in the shadows of adult worries. It was Jessica's story playing out, again, but this time they had the power to change the ending. Arnold found himself thinking of all the times he had dismissed artists as dreamers, had valued practical success over creative vision. He thought of his daughter, fighting her battles alone, and of Emily, teaching him that the greatest strength often came from reaching out to others. That night, unable to sleep, he made his way to Jessica's old studio. Emily was there, as she often was when rest eluded her, sitting cross-legged on the floor surrounded by her mother's unfinished works. She was drawing something, not her usual scenes of memory and loss, but something new. "What are you working on?" he asked softly, lowering himself to sit beside her. Emily held up the sketch. It showed the mansion's garden, but transformed. In her vision, the formal paths were lined with easels, the old conservatory converted into a children's art space. And there, in the center, was a figure he recognized as Maya, holding a paintbrush like a magic wand. "I think," Emily said carefully, as if testing out each word, "maybe we could make it bigger than just a gallery. Maybe it could be a place where artists could live and work, like Claire and Maya. A place where no one has to choose between their art and their family." Arnold looked at his granddaughter, this child who had spent weeks sleeping in a doghouse, who still sometimes woke crying from nightmares, and saw strength he had never known existed. She was offering others the very thing she had been denied for so long, a chance to belong. "The Jessica Blackwood Arts Foundation," he said slowly, the idea taking shape as he spoke. "A living legacy, not just preserving your mother's work, but continuing it in a new way." Emily nodded, adding another detail to her drawing, a small dog watching over the garden, ever vigilant, ever protective. "With a special program for children," she added quietly, "so no one else has to be alone." The autumn chill had just begun to touch the garden when crisis struck. Thor, Emily's faithful protector since those first days in his doghouse, fell ill. The veterinarian's diagnosis was grave, a fast-moving cancer that left them with impossible choices and precious little time. For Emily, who had already lost so much, the news was devastating. She retreated into silence again, spending hours lying beside Thor in his bed, her camera untouched, her sketchbook closed. The progress they'd made over the months seemed to crumble like autumn leaves. Claire and Maya, who had become regular visitors as the Arts Foundation took shape, were the first to notice the change in her. Maya especially seemed to understand the depth of Emily's pain. One afternoon, she brought her own sketchbook to Thor's bedside and simply sat there, drawing quietly, while Emily stroked the old dog's fur. "When my dad left," Maya said suddenly, her pencil never stopping its movement across the paper, "I thought the hurt would never go away. But my mom says sometimes love has to change shape to keep going." Emily didn't respond, but her hand stilled on Thor's head. Maya continued drawing, then carefully tore out the page and placed it where Emily could see it. It showed Thor, not as he was now, tired and weak, but as he had been in his prime, strong and protective, with golden lines running through his form like kintsugi. The next day, Emily picked up her camera for the first time in weeks. She began documenting Thor's daily life, his favorite sunbeams, the way his tail still thumped against the floor when she entered the room, the gentle patience in his eyes as he watched over his expanding family. Arnold, watching his granddaughter navigate this new form of grief, saw something remarkable emerging. The other children who came to the Foundation's art programs began bringing their own stories of loss and healing. Through their art, they shared experiences of saying goodbye to pets, friends, family members. Each story became a thread in a larger tapestry of understanding. Mrs. Chen discovered Emily one evening in the gallery space, surrounded by photographs of Thor she had taken over the months. There were images from the beginning, the faithful guardian in his doghouse, the protector who had recognized her need when no one else did. There were moments of joy, Thor playing in the garden, welcoming new visitors, watching over art classes, and there were recent photos, quieter, more contemplative, but filled with a deep love that transcended the sadness. "I want to make something," Emily said softly, not looking up from the photographs. "Something that helps other kids when they're sad, like how Thor helped me." The idea took shape gradually. With help from Claire, who had become something of a mentor, Emily began creating a special exhibition. It wasn't just about Thor, it was about all the ways love could protect, heal, and transform. She combined her photographs with drawings from the other children, creating a story of hope that wound through the gallery like a golden thread. Thor held on long enough to see the exhibition open. On a crisp October morning, he lay in his bed, near the gallery entrance, watching with tired but content eyes as children and their parents moved through the space. Emily sat beside him, one hand always touching his fur, the other holding her camera to capture these final precious moments. When he slipped away the next day, it was peaceful, surrounded by love, in the home he had helped create. Emily, showing a strength that amazed them all, insisted on taking one final photograph. "To remember," she said, her voice trembling but determined, "that even when goodbye hurts, the love stays." Winter settled over the Blackwood mansion like a heavy blanket, bringing with it both reflection and unexpected renewal. The Jessica Blackwood Arts Foundation had grown beyond anything they had initially imagined, touching lives across the city. But for Emily, the absence of Thor still left an ache that even art couldn't fully heal. It was during this time that Arnold made a discovery that would change everything. While reviewing old business records, part of his ongoing effort to transform more of his real estate holdings into spaces for artists, he found a series of letters that had been misfiled years ago. They were from Jessica, written during her final months but never delivered to their intended recipient. The letters revealed a truth that stunned him. Jessica had tried to reach out one last time, not for herself, but for Emily. She had known she was dying and had wanted to ensure her daughter wouldn't face the world alone. But by then, the walls Arnold had built around himself were too high, the gatekeepers too efficient at keeping out anything that might disturb his isolation. The last letter contained a photograph, Jessica and Emily at an art gallery opening, both smiling at the camera. On the back was written, "Dad, this is your granddaughter Emily. She has your eyes and Mum's spirit. She sees the world the way I do, through art and hope and endless possibility. When I'm gone, she'll need someone who understands that about her. I forgive you, Dad. I hope someday you'll forgive yourself." Arnold sat in his study for hours, the letters spread before him, feeling the weight of time lost and found. Outside, snow fell silently, covering the garden where Thor had once played, where Emily now taught other children to find their voice through art. When he finally gathered the courage to show Emily the letters, her reaction wasn't what he expected. Instead of anger or sadness, she reached for her camera, the same one that had belonged to her mother, and asked him to follow her. She led him to a part of the gallery he hadn't visited in weeks, the wall where her photographs of Thor were displayed. But now he noticed something new among them, older photographs, ones he didn't recognize. They showed Jessica at Emily's age, playing in this same garden, her own camera in hand. "Mom left these for me," Emily said quietly, "in a box with her camera. She said sometimes life gives us second chances, but we have to be brave enough to take them." She turned to look at her grandfather, her eyes full of a wisdom beyond her years. "Like you were brave enough to let me stay, like Thor was brave enough to trust me." The impact of her words hit Arnold like a physical force. Here was his granddaughter, who had endured loss after loss, teaching him about courage and forgiveness. In her face, he could see Jessica clearly, not just in her features, but in her spirit, in her ability to find light in the darkest places. "There's something else," Emily continued, leading him further along the wall. "Something I've been working on." The final section of the exhibition was new, photographs Emily had taken over the past few months, showing the transformation of the mansion from a fortress of solitude into a haven of creativity. There were images of children painting in the garden, of artists working in converted spaces, of Claire and Maya making themselves at home in the guest wing. But it was the central photograph that brought tears to Arnold's eyes. It showed his own transformation, captured in a moment he hadn't known was being documented. In the image, he sat on the floor of the gallery, surrounded by young artists, sharing stories about Jessica while Emily sat nearby, her camera catching the exact moment when his smile reached his eyes for the first time in decades. Mom wrote in her journal that everyone deserves a second chance at family, Emily said softly, even if it doesn't look the way we thought it would. Arnold looked at his granddaughter, this remarkable child who had slept in a doghouse, who had lost everything and still found the strength to help others, who had taught him more about love and courage than all his years of business success ever had. Your mother was right, he said, his voice rough with emotion, about everything, about art, about second chances, about you. He gestured to the photographs that told their story. This is your gift, Emily. Not just taking pictures, but seeing the truth in people, seeing their potential for change. 1 year to the day after Emily had first been found in Thor's doghouse, the Blackwood Mansion hosted a very special exhibition. The Jessica Blackwood Arts Foundation had become a beacon of hope for young artists across the city, but this show was different. It was Emily's first solo exhibition, titled simply Second Chances. The gallery spaces were filled with a journey told through her lens, starting with those first dark days of loneliness, captured in grainy security camera footage, through the gradual awakening of hope, documented in her own photographs. Thor's presence wove through the images like a guardian spirit, from those first moments of trust in his doghouse to his final days watching over the foundation's growing family. But it was the final room that held the exhibition's heart. Here, Emily had created something extraordinary, a collaboration between past and present. Jessica's unfinished paintings had been completed, not by single artists, but by pairs of established artists working with children from the Foundation's programs. Each piece told multiple stories, of loss transformed into connection, of endings becoming beginnings of art's power to heal across generations. The centerpiece was a large canvas that Emily herself had helped complete, one of Jessica's last unfinished works. The original painting showed the Blackwood Mansion as it had been, isolated and forbidding. Emily and Claire had worked together to transform it, adding layers that showed what it had become, a place of warmth and creativity, its gates open, its gardens filled with easels and laughing children. Golden lines ran through the painting like the seams in kintsugi, marking where old wounds had healed into something stronger. As visitors moved through the exhibition, they couldn't miss the transformation in the photographs of Arnold Blackwood himself. From the rigid, isolated figure in early images to the grandfather who now sat on the floor with young artists, who had learned to see wealth not in dollars, but in the richness of human connection. Maya, who had become Emily's closest friend, stood proudly beside her own contribution, a series of drawings showing the Foundation's impact on her family's life. Claire had found not just studio space, but a community that supported her art while embracing her role as a mother. Other families had similar stories, each one a testament to Jessica's vision of art as a way of building bridges between people. Mrs. Chen watched it all with quiet satisfaction, remembering the frightened child who had arrived on their doorstep just 1 year ago. Emily still had moments of struggle, still missed Thor with an ache that would never completely fade, still carried the weight of her mother's absence. But she had learned what Jessica had tried to teach through her art, that pain could be transformed, that love could change shape without being lost, that family could be found in the most unexpected places. The exhibition's guest book filled with messages of hope and gratitude, but it was a small note left by an anonymous visitor that captured the true miracle of Emily's journey. Fritz. In careful handwriting were the words, "Thank you for showing us that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the deepest wounds, and that it's never too late for love to find its way home." As the day drew to a close, Emily stood in the gallery's central room, her mother's camera in her hands. Around her, the walls told the story of a year that had changed everything, not just for her, but for every life touched by the foundation. Arnold joined her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said softly. Emily raised her camera, capturing one final image for the exhibition, their reflection in the gallery window, with the garden visible behind them. In the fading light, she could almost see Thor there, still watching over his family, still guarding the home that had grown far beyond its walls to embrace all those in need of second chances. "She would be proud of us," Emily corrected gently, lowering the camera to smile at her grandfather. "We all helped build this. Just like Mum said in her letter, there are many ways to leave a mark on the world. Sometimes the strongest ones are the ones we make together." As night fell over the Blackwood mansion, its windows glowed warmly, no longer a fortress keeping the world out, but a beacon drawing people in. In the garden, a new installation caught the last rays of sun, a sculpture of a German shepherd, crafted in bronze with delicate lines of gold running through it, eternally watching over the place where a lost child had found her way home, and in doing so had helped others find their way too.